Today I'm going to be setting up some more shade cloth over the rest of the garden. The shade cloth strips that I have right now are not enough to protect the plants fully, and I've been taking a lot of your guys' advice on having it be one single piece of shade cloth. So I ordered one online. It's 50% white shade cloth. It blocks off enough of the sun, but it doesn't make it dark underneath, so the plants aren't stretching for light, which is what I was noticing previously. Is it would block out a lot of the light, but it also made it really dark underneath. So some of my seedlings were a little bit leggy. So today I'm gonna set up the white shade cloth. It was finally cooling down and we were in the 90s, but later this week we're gonna get it back up to 114 degrees. And because the temperature just keeps fluctuating so much, I'm not gonna risk ruining my fall garden. So let's get started. Oh my God, this thing's huge. Oh my God. This is a 20 by 24 feet long piece of shade cloth. Oh my goodness. Okay. Okay, so it's gonna go like this. What's the shortest way? Probably this way, huh? Or no, yeah, probably this way. Okay. Somehow I gotta figure out how to get this up there. I did the pulley method on this half of the yard, but I don't think I can do it over here because I have so many different wood beams. Okay, I'm just gonna have to figure it out somehow. All right, let's just get, I'm just gonna start climbing the ladder and figure it out as I go. This morning, 71 days stand between me and the garden's most cherished harvest. In any other season, the urgency to protect my garden might not weigh so heavily, but these past weeks, the pressure has been immense. I've pushed myself to the limit, battling to save my garden after the sun scorched and destroyed nearly every fruiting vegetable. I've labored tirelessly, clearing out the charred remains, layering compost by the shovelful, and replanting with a hopeful heart. My deepest wish is for serendipity to revive in time to fill my basket for someone very precious to me. Yet all my efforts are in vain if I can't shield the garden from its fiercest adversary, the sun. It's a relentless tormentor, and my struggle against it feels almost futile as time slips away. So here I am, with a hopeful spirit, ready to pour every ounce of strength into this day, determined to make this dream a reality before time runs out. First, I have to take down a lot of the shade cloth so that I can make my way over to the edge. Right now I'm taking these two pieces of rope, that way I can tie it to one of the ends and I can pull it along. Hopefully it works. And then I'll use them to attach the corners to. Just tying this up like this, and then one on the other side. Outside. I'm sweating like crazy. Okay. So these two. Oh, we're gonna go over there. Right. I'm already getting frustrated. I haven't even started. According to the dictionary, failure is defined as a lack of success, but failing doesn't make one a failure. Failure number 1. In April of 2020, I set up shade cloth for the first time in serendipity. I'd been gardening for less than 8 months and had gone through endless packets of seeds, sowing every single vegetable I could get my hands on, in hopes that anything would sprout. At the time, I had no form of irrigation and the entire garden relied on me for every drop of moisture. Though the garden consisted of only 6 beds, managing them in the ever-increasing heat was a struggle. Occasionally, a peak of green would emerge, but the relentless heat of the low desert would soon fry the seedlings or they'd be ripped out by passing birds. Despite my best efforts to keep serendipity alive, I was unsuccessful, but I refused to fail. Instead, I scoured the internet for any tips or tricks to help me protect serendipity from the summer heat, a heat I was unaccustomed to gardening in, despite growing up in the low desert. Many times I felt like I was failing as a gardener because I had no idea what I was doing and no one to ask for advice. I often wondered if I'd made a mistake by starting a garden, but I reminded myself that every unsuccessful attempt was just a hard lesson from which I was gaining hands-on experience. One day, I found out about shade cloth, a concept I'd never heard of. I learned that many gardens and nurseries in hot, arid climates used shade cloth of varying densities to protect their plants. With so many options to choose from, I felt overwhelmed because I was trying to grow so many different plants, all of which required different percentages of shade cloth according to online sources to grow successfully. I didn't have the money to purchase several different pieces, so I settled for 40% black shade cloth as it claimed to work for most vegetables. When I initially set it up, there was no structure in place, so I laid it on top of my trellises and tied it down as best as I could. After stepping underneath, I immediately felt the difference in temperature compared to the rest of the yard. However, I soon noticed that some of my vining plants slowly climbed the arched trellises only to be quickly ripped apart as they made contact with the shade cloth during windy nights. At the time, I felt like I was taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Failure number 2. Frustration filled every cell of my being, but I eventually snapped out of it and decided to stop spending my energy on something that had already happened. Instead, I began brainstorming a solution to my problem. Laying the shade cloth directly over the garden trellises would only work to protect the shorter plants, but it would do more harm than good to any tall or vining plants that happened to graze against it. The only logical solution was to suspend the shade cloth above the garden beds and the arched garden trellises as well. So I headed to the hardware store with a small budget and no solid plan. I wandered through the aisles looking for inexpensive materials that would help me suspend the shade cloth high enough to allow proper airflow and room for my plants to grow and climb as they wished while spending as little as possible. Finally, in the wood aisle, I found the 8-foot tall 2x2s for a little over $2 each. With just over $20, I had what I needed. For the next few hours, I attached a wooden post to my garden beds using deck screws and re-secured the shade cloth. Exhausted but accomplished, I completed my second attempt at setting up the shade cloth. But the celebration was short-lived. After a few strong winds blew through serendipity, the cloth began sagging again, tearing where it brushed against the tops of arched trellises. Still, the majority held, and I promised myself I'd come up with a better plan the following year. I'm just roughly tying it off just so that I don't pull it by accident. Hopefully this next process is a lot faster. Failure number 3. In late spring of 2023, my budget had grown thanks to the support from this community on YouTube and TikTok. I could now afford taller, thicker wood. Prices had gone up, so I brainstormed a new structure to fix all my previous issues. The second attempt at setting up shade cloth taught me that I needed my structure to be taller than 8 feet because I had so many arched trellises in the garden and I had to account for any possible sagging of the fabric, improper airflow for the taller plants. Armed with a list of supplies, my sister and I headed to the hardware store, loaded several 10-foot tall 2x4s and tied them to the truck. When I say it out loud, it sounds so much easier than it actually was. The truth is, we spent ages picking out the best pieces of wood we could find, as most were warped, cracked, or defected in some way, and the best looking pieces were too high up or too deep underneath the stacks of wood. Building the new structure was challenging. With little experience with power tools and a fear of heights, I pushed through the fear by focusing on the long to-do list ahead. After several hours, attempt number 3 was complete, and I felt on top of the world until a rainstorm knocked some of my posts down. Seeing my hard work destroyed once more was disheartening. But in that moment, just like before, I had a choice: give up or try again. I chose the latter, determined to prove to myself that I could do it. Serendipity has always been more than a garden to me. It's proof that I can set goals and achieve them even if I don't succeed right away. Once the haze of frustration cleared, I took a deep breath and examined the damage a little closer to see why the posts had fallen down so easily. Some were broken from the fall, but the main posts simply weren't attached securely because I'd used the wrong size screws. I realized the solution was simple: longer screws to keep the posts in place, and adding a few more 1x2s for stability would also help. After yet another trip to the hardware store, I picked up the necessary supplies, and in one evening, my shade structure was back up and more stable than before. I'm gonna tie some string to the other 2 corners now that I found them. That way I can try and just pull it across. That's what I was planning to do in the first place, but I accidentally flipped it, so oh well. You're probably also wondering why I didn't take off the black shade cloth before putting on the white one. And the reason for that is so that the white one wouldn't be falling through all the gaps. Otherwise, I think it would have taken me way longer. And also because it's so hot that if I didn't have the black shade cloth on, there's no way I'd be able to do this right now. It'd just be too unbearable. Failure number 4. I thought building the shade structure would save my garden from the summer heat, but as time went by and the summer heat intensified, the 2 strips of black shade cloth were not enough to fully protect my garden, and once more, everything became scorched. That wasn't the only problem. Any newly sprouted seedlings that survived the intense sun and heat were turning leggy as they searched for light underneath the dark shade cloth. The solution was clear. The black shade cloth wasn't meeting the needs of Serendipity anymore, so I needed to switch it out for something that blocked enough sunlight without casting a shadow over the garden. White shade cloth would do the trick, and it was a pricey investment, but I finally had the budget for it. After a lot of research, I placed my order and anxiously waited for it to arrive at my doorstep, which brings us to today. When I came out to Serendipity this morning, I had no idea how I was going to get this enormous piece of white 50% shade cloth up and over the 10-foot tall structure. There was no scribbled piece of printer paper I could refer to, and I genuinely felt overwhelmed. Up to this point, I'd managed to set everything else up myself, and I wondered if this would finally be the time where I'd have to take a step back and allow someone else to finish the project for me. You'd think that after so many failed attempts and brief successes, I'd know exactly what to do, but the whole thing felt almost impossible. As I dragged out my heavy ladder and climbed up the all too familiar steps, the fear that had engulfed me not long ago was nothing more than a mere whisper. I looked up at the structure from time to time, searching for any clues to an answer that I had not yet thought of. An inkling of a possible solution was to tie 2 long pieces of leftover clothesline to 2 corners of the massive shade cloth so that no matter how jumbled up the fabric became, I could spot the 2 end pieces. Then I realized that by leaving them extra long, there was a possibility that I could also use them to help me extend the shade cloth without having to rely on the handy but very heavy ladder. The project would require a lot of energy, so I had to reserve as much as possible without overexerting myself. This was all I could think of, but that was okay. Sometimes big problems are more overwhelming because I expect myself to have an immediate solution, but more often than not, that leads to frustration. What I've personally found helps more is chipping away at a big problem little by little, because sometimes there is no one solution, but rather several little solutions that help make an impossible task doable. After I'd scrunched most of the shade cloth fabric up onto the shade structure, I scanned around for the long pieces of clothesline and realized that by tying them loosely to the edges of the shade structure, they could be anchored in place, and that would make extending the remaining fabric much easier. However, this was barely the beginning of the project, and I could already feel the sun's heat beating down on me. With no pulley system in place for this section of the garden, I figured the best course of action was to complete the rest of the project by pushing and tugging at the massive piece of shade cloth over the structure a little at a time. I was able to do this by rummaging around on my porch for something to use as an extender, and eventually found a scrap piece of wood from an old project. This worked perfectly, and I was able to slowly but surely move the shade cloth along by poking at it from the ground to encourage it to unfurl over my shade structure. By doing this enough times, eventually I was able to find the two pieces of clothesline I tied to the corners earlier. I grabbed the two ends of the clothesline and tied them down to some wooden posts to anchor one end of the shade cloth and add tension so I could more easily extend the rest over the garden. Finally, after over an hour of repeating the process, I was done. It might not have been the easiest or fastest way to set up the shade cloth, but I completed the project by myself, and the sense of empowerment I felt by the end was nothing short of exhilarating. I'm gonna use zip ties to attach it to the structure. I would usually use rope, but I don't think I need to in this case. So zip ties it is. Zip ties were my best friend when securing the shade cloth in place. I knew they wouldn't be a permanent solution, but at the unbeatable price of $2.99 for a pack of 100, they would do the job for a while. Their versatility really came in handy with this particular project because when wrapping them around the 2x4 post, I could connect several to get the correct length I needed. I also used them to attach the large piece of shade cloth to the existing one I'd set up a few days ago. All I really had to do was match up the grommets on both pieces of shade cloth, run a zip tie through, and snip off the ends using small garden snips. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this before, but a feature I really enjoy about this shade cloth, and one I'd recommend to look for in any piece of shade fabric, is grommets, because that makes the edges more sturdy and facilitates the process of tying down the shade cloth. Now that I have the shade cloth up, the last thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take down all of the black shade cloth, which should be a lot easier because I just need to snip off the zip ties and then just kind of pull it and it should come right off. I was gonna store those pieces, but I think I'm actually gonna finish covering up the last little section of the garden. Let me show you. I have about 6 feet of open space right here, so I want to cover it up. That way I can protect all of the tropicals that I have here. And then sometime next year, I'll replace the black portion and have it all be the white shade cloth because I think that one just works so much better. But this one will do for now. Removing the older strips of 40% black shade cloth was much easier than setting up the new piece of 50% white shade cloth, but the process itself was still very time consuming and tiring. I relied heavily on my ladder for this portion of the project because the black strips of fabric were attached with countless zip ties, so I had to cut through them in order to take it down. By this time, most of the zip ties I'd used long ago had been eaten away by the sun and become so brittle to the point where slight winds were able to snap them off very easily. But a ton were still left as I'd used a ridiculous amount with this in mind, and I was definitely regretting it. I'm glad I stuck to using the spare piece of wood for the first half of this project because even though removing the shade cloth was much easier than setting it up, lugging the ladder around, opening then closing it up, and climbing up and down over and over again was depleting my energy by the second. After all the zip ties were finally removed, I was able to slip the long strips of shade cloth off the structure very easily. And as soon as they were removed, the garden felt like it was illuminated by the soft light effect that the white shade cloth created. Done! I did it! I set up the whole thing. It immediately feels so much cooler down here, and it's still nice and bright. It just looks like it was maybe like an overcast day as of right now. Look how bright it is. And it looks so much prettier. Oh my goodness. I wish I had done this from the beginning. But the truth is, when I first started setting up shade cloth, I was looking for the most inexpensive shade cloth I could find. The white one was significantly more expensive than the black one that I used to buy, but I think it works so much better. It looks so much nicer, and I'm sure the garden is going to thrive. And I think I'm going to try out an experiment this year. Hold on. I need to sit down because my hand is too shaky. I think I'm going to try an experiment this year where I'm going to leave it up all throughout the winter, the fall and winter. Hopefully it'll make the garden feel a lot cooler, even though it will block out some light. We'll just have to see how that works. But hopefully it'll make the garden feel a lot cooler, and maybe my cold season crops won't bolt quite as fast. But who knows, maybe once it gets really cloudy, I might just go ahead and take it down. But as of right now, in this moment, I don't want to. Just because it takes so long to put up. I'm completely drenched in sweat, and I don't want to have to keep doing this every single year. It's just far too much work. And honestly, I love the way it looks. If it was the black shade cloth, I would definitely have to, because that one makes things a little too dark. But this white one hopefully will be okay. We'll just have to wait and see. The last thing to do is put up the last little remaining section. Oh, but did I show you how it looks though? Look how beautiful it looks. Oh my goodness. I love it. Oh my goodness. It looks so nice. So much better. It was definitely an investment, but a well worth investment. So excited. I can't even begin to explain how excited I feel. Right now, I'm just untying all the old clothesline from these pieces of shade cloth, just like that, and I'm going to attach it to the remaining cord using zip ties. So instead of buying little hooks or clips, I like using zip ties just because they're easy to put on, and if I ever need to take them off, I can do that too just as easily. I'm basically going to attach both of these together to make it into one big wider piece. So all I'm doing, sort of like if you were sewing. Oh, where's my pruners? No. Oh my god. Where did, oh, they're here. now the pieces are connected so that they're a lot wider, like this. Next, I'm gonna attach these like this, creating a little loop, almost like you would have on a shower curtain over here. Oh. Over here. This last part of the project was never part of my plan. Though to be fair, there was barely a plan to begin with. Any part of me hesitated on setting it up in the first place. Had I stopped at the white shade cloth, I could have been done by now, but I think I would have regretted it. Besides, by this point, I'd spent so much money purchasing the white shade cloth that I'd have to wait until next year to purchase more, as there were other garden expenses in the foreseeable future that I'd have to take care of first. Plus, it felt nice to be able to offer some protection to my orchard, which had already been showing signs of heat stress for a while now without spending any more money. On the bright side, having the two shade cloths up at the same time, side by side, would allow me to see how they affected the growth of my plants, and I lit up with excitement at the thought of the knowledge I could gain over the next few months. By the time I was done setting up the leftover 40% black shade cloth, I was exhausted, but optimistic about what the future would look like for Serendipity. I'm finally done. It took me a couple hours, but the whole garden is covered in shade cloth. This is what it looks like up here. And then this is it right here. You can just tell the huge difference in how bright it is compared to here. But because this gets most of the direct sun exposure, hopefully that'll help out. And some of my plants, like my peach tree, will look a lot happier. There's a few areas like this one that I feel sag a little too low for my liking, so I might eventually go through and add another line just to keep it nice and taut, but it works. Time to go inside. I have no energy left. Failure number 5 caught me by surprise. For 8 days, I felt on top of the world until a sudden, unexpected thunderstorm burst through Serendipity, ripping and clawing at the shade cloth with its relentless windy arms. I was getting ready for bed when I heard the wind howling outside my window. If I had noticed sooner, I would have used the pulley system to pull the shade cloth to safety, tugging it away from the storm's grasp. But by the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. All I could do was stand on my porch, heart sinking, as I watched my hard work unravel in the wind. 5 times I've set up shade cloth. 5 times I've failed. And 5 times I'll pick myself back up. I can't say how many more times I'll stumble before I get it right, or if I ever fully will. Success may grace me for a few days, months, or even years, but eventually, just as I'm starting to feel secure, something will come to shake things up and test just how much I want this. Failure is often defined by a lack of success, but failing doesn't make you a failure. Not if you have the resilience to gather the pieces and try again, piecing together a puzzle that can feel impossible to solve. Failure comes knocking at the most unexpected times, not once, not twice, but endlessly. Early in my gardening journey, I treated failure as an unwelcome guest, an intruder into serendipity. But now I see it as a friend, one who arrives uninvited, revealing flaws I might have overlooked, forcing me to dig deeper, to try harder, even when I think I've given all I have. Failure may be a stern teacher, but it's also one of the greatest allies of success. It pushes us beyond our limits, showing us that true growth springs from the most uncomfortable places. Though it's hard to see it in the moment, failure is a companion that walks with us on the path to mastery, reminding us that every fall is an opportunity to build something stronger.